The Velanthari Empire had ruled over 2,000 star systems for nearly 3,000 years. Their warships were feared across the galaxy. Their armies had crushed countless civilizations. No species had ever defeated them in open battle, and the royal family believed that no species ever would. So when the border sensors detected a small, unknown vessel entering their territory near the mining colony of Keth Prime, High Commander Zorath did not feel worry. He felt annoyance. Another primitive species had wandered into Velanthari space, and now he would have to waste his afternoon destroying them. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Vengeance, and watched the sensor display with 4 of his 6 eyes. The unknown ship was tiny, barely larger than a Velanthari shuttle. It moved slowly through the asteroid field near the border, stopping occasionally as if it were looking at things. "What species?" Zorath asked his sensor officer. "Unknown, High Commander. We have no records of this vessel design, but we are detecting life signs. 12 beings aboard." 12. Zorath almost laughed. 12 creatures in a ship the size of a cargo shuttle had wandered into the territory of the greatest empire in known space. This would not even qualify as a battle. It would be an execution. "Dispatch 40 warships," Zorath ordered. "Surround them. Demand surrender. If they refuse, destroy them." The fleet moved out within the hour. 40 Velanthari warships, each one capable of burning a city to ash, formed a perfect sphere around the tiny alien vessel. Their weapons locked on, their shields hummed with power. The trap was set. On board the human scout ship Stalwart, Lieutenant Commander Nate Calloway sat in the captain's chair and watched 40 alien warships appear on his screen. He was a calm man by nature, raised on a cattle ranch in Montana where patience was more valuable than speed. He had joined the Navy because he liked the quiet of space, the long stretches of nothing between the stars. He had not expected to find an alien empire on his mapping mission. "Well," he said quietly, "that's a lot of ships." Sergeant Amy Dawson stood at the tactical station, her fingers already moving across the controls. She was from Texas, quick with her hands and quicker with her mind. She had served with Calloway for 3 years, and she knew that his calm voice meant he was already thinking 10 steps ahead. "Shields up?" she asked. "Shields up. But let's not shoot first. Maybe they just want to talk." The communication system crackled, and a harsh alien voice filled the bridge. The universal translator took a moment to process the language, then spoke in flat, mechanical English. "Unknown vessel. You have entered the sovereign territory of the Velanthari Empire. You will surrender immediately. You will power down your weapons. You will prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in your complete destruction." Calloway leaned forward and pressed the reply button. "Velanthari vessels, this is Lieutenant Commander Nate Calloway of the United Earth Navy scout ship Stalwart. We are a reconnaissance unit on a peaceful mapping mission. We did not know this space was claimed. We mean no disrespect and will happily leave your territory." There was a long pause. Then the alien voice returned, and this time it sounded angry. "You will not leave. You will surrender. Your vessel and your crew are now property of the Velanthari Empire. This is not a negotiation." Calloway looked at Dawson. She shook her head slowly. They both knew what property meant. They had heard stories from other species about the Velanthari, about their slave markets and their prison mines. Surrender was not an option. "Velanthari Commander," Calloway said, keeping his voice steady, "I must respectfully decline your offer. We will be leaving now." The alien commander's response was not words. It was weapons fire. 40 warships opened up at once, filling the space around the Stalwart with bright plasma bolts and energy beams. The void lit up like a sun being born. Any normal ship would have been vaporized in the first second. The Stalwart was not a normal ship. Calloway did not give orders. He did not need to. His crew had trained for this. Dawson threw the ship into a spinning dive that would have killed the crew if not for the inertial dampeners. Specialist Rosa Vega, the engineer, pushed the engines past their safety limits, giving them speed that the alien targeting systems could not track. Petty Officer Kyle Hunt, the weapons specialist, began selecting targets with cold precision. The stalwart danced. It moved through the storm of weapons fire like a leaf in the wind, never where the enemy expected it to be. The alien gunners tried to predict its path, but human pilots did not fly in predictable patterns. They flew by instinct, by feel, by some wild creativity that the Velenthari had never encountered. And then the stalwart began to shoot back. Human weapons were different from Velenthari weapons. The aliens used energy-based systems, plasma and lasers that their shields were designed to absorb. Humans used kinetic weapons, small metal slugs accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. The Velenthari shields were not designed for kinetic impacts. The first slug punched through a destroyer's shield like it was not there. It hit the engine section and the ship went dark, spinning out of control. The second slug hit a cruiser's weapon array and the whole front of the ship exploded. The third slug cracked a battleship's hull from front to back. The Velenthari commanders began to panic. This was not possible. This tiny ship, this insignificant speck, was tearing through their formation like a predator through prey. They fired everything they had, but they could not hit it. They tried to ram it, but it was too fast. They called for reinforcements, but by the time the message was sent, it was already too late. 30 minutes. That was how long the battle lasted. In 30 minutes, the stalwart had destroyed 4 Velenthari warships and disabled 9 others. The remaining 27 ships were damaged, confused, and terrified. Calloway looked at his crew. They were breathing hard, sweat on their faces, but they were alive. The ship had taken some hits, but Vega was already patching the damage. "Corporal Marsh," Calloway said to his communications officer, a young man barely out of training, "send a priority alert to Earth Command. Tell them we have made contact with a hostile alien empire. Tell them to prepare for possible war." Then he turned back to the view screen, where the Velenthari fleet was regrouping. "Dawson, get us out of here. Best speed to New Haven Colony." The stalwart jumped to hyperspace and vanished, leaving behind a field of wreckage and a high commander who could not understand what had just happened. Zorath stood on his bridge, surrounded by damage reports and casualty lists. He had sent 40 warships against 12 beings in a scout ship. He had lost 13 ships in half an hour. He knew he would have to report this to the Emperor. He knew what that report would mean. The Velenthari Empire had just found a new enemy, and for the first time in 3,000 years, Zorath felt something he had never felt before. Fear. The throne room of the Velenthari Empire was carved from a single piece of black obsidian, mined from the core of their dying homeworld 10,000 years ago. It was meant to remind all who entered that the Empire was eternal, unbreakable, harder than stone. The emperors who sat upon the great throne had watched civilizations rise and fall. They had crushed rebellions and conquered galaxies. They had never known defeat. Until now. Emperor Kasseth the Younger sat upon the obsidian throne and listened to High Commander Zorath's report. His face showed no emotion, but his claws dug into the armrests hard enough to leave marks. Around him, the War Council stood in horrified silence. Military advisors who had planned the conquest of entire star systems looked at each other with fear in their eyes. Princess Mirath stood at her father's right hand, as was her place as eldest daughter and heir to the throne. She was young by Velenthari standards, barely 200 years old, but she had been trained in politics and warfare since birth. She understood what Zorath's report meant. She understood it better than anyone else in the room. "Let me be certain I understand," the Emperor said, his voice cold and quiet. You sent 40 warships against a single vessel, a small vessel, a vessel with 12 crew members. Yes, Your Majesty, Zorath said. He was kneeling on the hard floor, his head bowed, his voice shaking. And you lost 13 ships, destroyed or disabled, in 30 minutes. Yes, Your Majesty. And the enemy vessel escaped. Yes, Your Majesty. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was like ice cracking. How? Zorath raised his head slightly. Your Majesty, their technology is unlike anything we have encountered. Their weapons use kinetic projectiles, solid metal accelerated to extreme velocities. Our shields are designed to absorb energy weapons. Against their projectiles, our shields are almost useless. One of the military advisors stepped forward. Your Majesty, we have analyzed the sensor data from the battle. The human vessel's maneuverability is beyond anything in our fleet. Their pilots seem to react before our weapons fire, as if they can predict where we will shoot. They cannot predict, another advisor said. They adapt. We watch them learn our attack patterns in real time. By the end of the battle, they knew exactly how we would fire and moved accordingly. Impossible, said Grand Admiral Vorath, the Emperor's most trusted commander. He was old, scarred from 100 battles, and he had never lost a war. No species learns that quickly. You must be mistaken. We have the sensor data, Grand Admiral. We watched them do it. Princess Myrath stepped forward. Father, may I speak? The Emperor nodded. If the reports are accurate, then this was not a warship we encountered. It was a scout, a reconnaissance vessel. Its purpose was observation, not combat. The room went very quiet. If a single scout ship could do this much damage to a prepared fleet, Myrath continued, then what could their warships do? What could their armies do? Enough, the Emperor said. He stood from his throne, and everyone in the room immediately dropped to their knees. I have heard enough speculation. I want facts. I want to know everything about these humans, where they come from, how many there are, what weapons they have, and then I want them destroyed. He turned to Grand Admiral Vorath. You will assemble an invasion fleet, 300 capital ships, 50,000 ground troops. You will find these humans, and you will burn their worlds to ash. You will not return until they are extinct. Do you understand? Vorath bowed his head. Yes, Your Majesty. It will be done. The Emperor swept out of the throne room, his advisors hurrying after him. Only Princess Myrath remained, standing alone in the vast obsidian chamber, thinking about what she had seen in the sensor data. The human ship had been surrounded, outnumbered 40-1. Any sane species would have surrendered. Any logical species would have known that fighting was hopeless. But the humans had fought anyway, and they had won. Myrath had been raised to believe that the Valanthari were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. She had been taught that no species could match their strength, their discipline, their technology. She had watched her father's armies crush rebellion after rebellion without breaking a sweat. Now she looked at the sensor data again, at the small ship dancing through a storm of weapons fire, and she felt something she had never felt before. She felt doubt. Far across the galaxy, the stalwart dropped out of hyperspace near a small blue-green world called New Haven. It was a farming colony, one of humanity's newest settlements. Home to 40,000 people who had left Earth looking for a simpler life. They grew crops in the rich soil. They raised cattle on the wide plains. They built small towns with white churches and general stores, and schools where children learned to read. They had no idea what was coming. Lieutenant Commander Calloway stood on the bridge and looked at the planet on his view screen. His ship was damaged. His crew was exhausted. They had just fought a battle that should have killed them all, and they had won only because human reflexes were faster than alien targeting computers. Sir, Corporal Danny Marsh said from the communications station, I've sent the priority alert to Earth Command. They received it. They're sending help. How long? 3 weeks minimum, sir. Maybe longer. Calloway closed his eyes. 3 weeks. A lot could happen in 3 weeks. Sir, Dawson said quietly, we could run. Keep moving. Lead them away from the colony. Calloway shook his head. They tracked our hyperspace signature here. They know about New Haven now. If we run, they'll still come here. They'll find the colony, and there won't be anyone to warn them. He looked around at his crew. 12 people, engineers and technicians, and one very young communications officer. They were not soldiers. They were explorers. They had signed up to map stars and discover new worlds, not to fight wars, but they were all he had. We stay, Calloway said. We warn the colony. We help them prepare, and we hold out until reinforcements arrive. Dawson nodded slowly. That's probably a suicide mission, sir. Probably. Okay. She smiled, a hard Texas smile that had no fear in it. Let's get to work. The stalwart descended toward New Haven, carrying 12 humans who had just made the most important decision of their lives. They were going to fight. The people of New Haven were farmers. They had left Earth because they wanted peace, wanted open skies and honest work and a place to raise their children away from the crowded cities. They had built their colony with their own hands, plowing fields and raising barns and creating a community where everyone knew everyone else's name. They were not warriors. But when Lieutenant Commander Calloway landed his damaged ship in the middle of their largest town and told them what was coming, not a single person ran. Ben Carver was the first to step forward. He was 60 years old, retired from the Marines 20 years ago, and he had spent the last 2 decades growing corn and pretending that the nightmares from his service days did not still wake him up at night. He looked at Calloway with steady eyes and said 4 words. Tell us what you need. They had 3 days before the Velenthari fleet arrived, 3 days to turn a farming colony into a fortress. Calloway worked with Carver to organize the defense. The colonial militia was only 200 people, men and women who had signed up for what they thought would be peaceful guard duty. They had hunting rifles and pistols, weapons designed for wolves and coyotes, not alien soldiers. But Carver looked at those rifles and saw possibilities. Velenthari armor is designed for energy weapons, Calloway explained. Kinetic rounds will punch right through. Carver smiled grimly. My grandfather's 30-06 will do just fine then. Sergeant Dawson took charge of the evacuation. The colony had 40,000 people, but only a fraction could fight. The rest, the children and elderly and those who simply could not hold a gun, needed to hide. Dawson found caves in the northern mountains, natural shelters that would not show up on alien sensors. She organized supply runs and water storage and medical stations. She made sure every child had a blanket and every grandmother had her medicine. Specialist Rosa Vega worked without sleep for 2 days straight. She was the engineer, the woman who could make machines do impossible things. Now she turned her skills to destruction. The colony had agricultural equipment, harvesters and tractors and irrigation pumps. Vega turned them into bombs. She wired the grain silos to explode. She modified the fertilizer storage into massive explosive charges. She created a minefield using nothing but farming supplies and her own creativity. Kyle Hunt, the weapons specialist, set up firing positions throughout the town. He knew that the humans could not win a straight fight. They were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. But they did not need to win. They just needed to survive long enough for help to arrive. We fight smart, he told the militia volunteers. We hit them and move. Never stay in one place. Make them think we're everywhere at once. On the morning of the 3rd day, Corporal Danny Marsh picked up the Velenthari fleet on his sensors. 300 capital ships, 50,000 ground troops, enough firepower to burn the entire planet to ash. He called Calloway to the bridge. The lieutenant commander looked at the sensor display for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Tell everyone to get to their positions. It's time." The Velanthari landed with the confidence of conquerors. Grand Admiral Vorath watched from his flagship as thousands of troop carriers descended toward the colony. His soldiers were the finest in the Empire, trained from birth for war. They had crushed species far more advanced than these humans. This would be a simple cleanup operation. The first wave of troops entered the main settlement expecting terrified civilians. Instead, they found empty streets and silent buildings. The shops were abandoned. The homes were dark. It was like walking into a ghost town. Then the ground exploded. Vega's bombs tore through the alien formation like thunder. Buildings collapsed on Velanthari soldiers. Streets became craters. The carefully planned advance turned into chaos in seconds. Soldiers ran for cover, but there was no cover. Every building was a trap. Every street was a kill zone. And then the humans started shooting. From the rooftops and basement windows, from behind overturned wagons and inside grain silos, 200 militia members opened fire. Their hunting rifles cracked through the morning air. Each shot found its target. Velanthari soldiers fell, their energy-resistant armor useless against bullets that had been killing deer and elk for generations. Ben Carver stood on the roof of the general store, his grandfather's rifle warm in his hands. He had not fired a weapon in anger for 20 years. Now he fired again and again, each shot finding an alien heart. Beside him, a 17-year-old girl named Lucy Martinez reloaded her father's shotgun and kept shooting. She had never killed anything larger than a rabbit. Today, she was a soldier. The Velanthari tried to regroup. They brought up heavy weapons and armored vehicles. But the humans knew their town. They knew every alley and back road, every rooftop and cellar. They disappeared and reappeared, striking from unexpected angles, vanishing before the aliens could return fire. For 18 hours, the battle raged. The Velanthari lost 12,000 soldiers, 12,000 of their finest warriors, killed by farmers with hunting rifles. Grand Admiral Vorath watched the casualty reports come in and felt his confidence crumble. This was not possible. This could not be happening. He had brought enough force to conquer a planet, and he was losing to civilians. He made the decision that Calloway had known he would make. He called for orbital bombardment. "Burn the settlement," Vorath ordered. "Burn it all." His ships began to move into position, their massive weapons charging. In minutes, they would unleash enough firepower to turn the entire colony into a smoking crater. The humans on the ground would die. The caves in the mountains would collapse. Everything would burn. Calloway stood in the Stalwart's bridge and watched the alien fleet prepare to fire. His ship was damaged and low on ammunition. His crew was exhausted. They had done everything they could. "Sir," Dawson said quietly, "if we position ourselves between the fleet and the colony, we might be able to block the first bombardment. Give the people in the caves a few more minutes." Calloway looked at her. She knew what she was suggesting. The Stalwart could not survive a full fleet bombardment. She was asking permission to die. He nodded. The Stalwart rose from the surface, climbing toward the alien fleet on damaged engines. 12 humans in a broken ship, flying toward 300 warships. It was suicide. It was pointless. It was the most human thing Calloway had ever done. And then his sensors lit up. Something was coming out of hyperspace. Something big. Calloway stared at the display, not quite believing what he was seeing. "Reinforcements," he breathed. They made it. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace directly between the Stalwart and the Velanthari formation. 1 carrier, 4 destroyers. That was all. But for Lieutenant Commander Nate Calloway and his 12 exhausted crew members, it was the most beautiful sight in the universe. Help had arrived. Admiral Patricia Cole stood on the bridge of the carrier Resolute, and looked at the enemy fleet. 300 capital ships, 50,000 ground troops. The largest Velanthari invasion force ever assembled, according to the intelligence reports. She had brought 1 carrier and 4 destroyers. Cole was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death. The fleet called her the Surgeon because of the way she fought, precise and methodical, cutting out the enemy's strength with careful, calculated strikes. She had won 3 colonial wars without losing a single major engagement. She had never been outnumbered less than 10-1. Today she was outnumbered 60-1. She smiled slightly. Those were better odds than usual. "Open a channel to the stalwart," she said. Lieutenant Commander Calloway's face appeared on her screen. He looked exhausted, his uniform torn, his eyes red from days without sleep. But his voice was steady. "Admiral Cole, good to see you. Lieutenant Commander, status report. Shields at 12%, ammunition almost gone. The colony held, but they're preparing for orbital bombardment. We were about to try to block it." Cole nodded. She had read the reports during the hyperspace jump. 12 people in a scout ship had held off 40 warships. A farming colony had killed 12,000 Velanthari soldiers. These people had done the impossible, and they had done it knowing that help might never come. "Get your people to cover, Calloway. We'll handle this." "Admiral, with respect, they have 300 ships. You have 5. "I know." Cole smiled again, and there was no warmth in it. "They should have brought more." She closed the channel and turned to her tactical officer. "Launch all fighters. Target their command ships first. I want their coordination broken within the first 5 minutes." The Resolute's fighter bays opened, and 200 strike craft poured into space. Human fighters were small and fast, single-pilot vessels built for speed and agility. Each pilot was trained for years before they ever saw combat. Each one could fly rings around the best Velanthari gunners. And unlike the Velanthari, human pilots did not fly in formation. Grand Admiral Vorath watched the human fighters spread out across his sensor display and felt confusion. They were not attacking in waves. They were not forming battle lines. They were scattering, each one going in a different direction, each one choosing its own path through his fleet. "What are they doing?" he demanded. His tactical officer shook his head. "Unknown, Grand Admiral. Their movements appear random." They were not random. They were creative. The first fighter dove toward a Velanthari battleship, drawing fire from a dozen gun emplacements. The pilot, a young man named Jack Reeves from a small town in Ohio, danced through the weapons fire like he was born to fly. He did not attack the battleship. He was not trying to destroy it. He was keeping its guns busy. While Reeves drew fire, 3 other fighters came in from different angles and targeted the battleship's shield generators. Their kinetic rounds punched through the hull, and the shields went down. A moment later, one of the human destroyers fired a single torpedo that hit the unshielded reactor core. The battleship exploded. Across the battlefield, the same scene played out again and again. Human pilots worked together without orders, without coordination, without any central command. They saw opportunities and took them. They covered each other without being asked. They fought like a single organism with 200 minds. The Velanthari could not adapt. Their tactics depended on rigid formations and centralized command. When their commanders gave orders, their ships obeyed exactly as instructed. But the humans did not give orders. Each pilot made their own decisions, responded to threats in real time, created new strategies on the fly. It was chaos. Beautiful, deadly chaos. Admiral Cole watched the battle unfold on her tactical display. Her destroyers were working in pairs, targeting Velanthari command ships with coordinated strikes. Every time they killed a commander, another section of the enemy fleet lost coordination. Ships began firing at random, sometimes hitting each other. Formations collapsed into confusion. "Status report," Cole said calmly. 47 enemy ships destroyed, 32 disabled. We've lost 6 fighters. 6. She had lost 6 pilots out of 200, and she had already destroyed nearly a quarter of the enemy fleet. Grand Admiral Vorath could not understand what was happening. He was the greatest commander in the Velanthari Empire. He had conquered dozens of species. He had never lost a battle. Now he was losing. Badly. All ships, concentrate fire on the carrier, he ordered. If he could kill the human flagship, perhaps their fighters would lose coordination. Perhaps they would retreat. 150 Velanthari warships turned their weapons toward the Resolute. The space around the carrier filled with plasma bolts and energy beams. Any ship in the galaxy would have been destroyed in seconds. The Resolute's shields held. Human shields were different from Velanthari shields. Where the aliens used static barriers, humans used adaptive systems that shifted and changed to absorb incoming fire. The more the Velanthari shot, the more the shields learned, the stronger they became. And while the enemy fleet focused on the carrier, they stopped paying attention to the fighters. That was a mistake. Jack Reeves led a group of 30 pilots straight into the heart of the Velanthari formation. They found Vorath's flagship, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons, and they tore it apart piece by piece. They destroyed its engines first, leaving it dead in space. Then they destroyed its communications array, cutting it off from the rest of the fleet. Then they started working on its weapons. Vorath stood on his crippled bridge and watched his ship die around him. Fires burned in the corridors. Officers screamed for orders he could not give. The human fighters circled his flagship like wolves around a wounded animal, and there was nothing he could do. "All ships," he said into a communicator that barely worked. "Retreat. Full retreat. Get us out of here." The Velanthari fleet ran. Those ships that could still move turned away from New Haven and fled toward hyperspace. The humans pursued, picking off stragglers, destroying any ship too slow to escape. By the time the last Velanthari vessel jumped away, 93 ships remained from the original 300. The battle had lasted 17 minutes. Admiral Cole watched the enemy fleet disappear and allowed herself a small sigh. Around her, the bridge crew was cheering, embracing each other, celebrating a victory that should have been impossible. "Quiet," Cole said, and the celebration stopped immediately. "We have wounded to recover and a colony to help. This war is not over. It has barely begun." She turned to her communications officer. "Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we need to talk to whoever is in charge of that empire. Tell them we need to end this before it gets worse." The officer nodded and began transmitting. Cole looked out at the stars, at the wreckage of 207 enemy warships floating in the void, at the small blue-green planet that 40,000 farmers called home. They had won this battle. But she knew the Velanthari would not stop. They were an empire built on conquest, and empires did not accept defeat easily. More battles were coming, more death, more destruction, unless someone found a way to make peace. Cole hoped that was still possible. She had seen enough war to last a lifetime. She did not want to see more, but if more war came, she would be ready. They all would be. 6 weeks after the Battle of New Haven, the obsidian throne room of the Velanthari Empire was filled with silence. The nobility stood in their finest robes, their scales polished, their jewels gleaming. But there was no pride in their eyes. There was only fear. Emperor Cassith the Younger sat upon his throne and stared at the kneeling figure before him. Grand Admiral Vorath, the greatest military commander in Velanthari history, had returned in disgrace. His flagship was a wreck. His fleet was destroyed. His reputation was ashes. "Tell me again," the Emperor said, his voice barely above a whisper, "how many ships you lost?" 207, Your Majesty." Vorath's voice shook. "Destroyed or disabled?" "And how many human ships were involved?" "1 carrier, 4 destroyers, 200 fighters. The Emperor closed all 6 of his eyes. He had sent 300 of his finest warships against 5 human vessels. He had lost 2/3 of his invasion force in 17 minutes. Princess Mirath stood at her father's side, her face carefully blank. She had studied the battle reports. She had analyzed every moment of the engagement. She understood exactly what had happened and what it meant for the Empire. The humans did not fight like any species the Velanthari had ever encountered. They did not follow rules. They did not use formations. They fought with a wild creativity that seemed almost random, but was devastatingly effective. Each human pilot was a commander. Each human ship was an army, and this was only a tiny fraction of their strength. The doors of the throne room opened, and a human walked in. Her name was Grace Holloway. She was tall and straight, with brown hair going gray at the temples and calm eyes that showed no fear. She wore a simple blue uniform with no decorations, no medals, no signs of rank. She was the human ambassador, sent by United Earth Command to deliver a message. Guards surrounded her, weapons raised, ready to kill at the Emperor's word. She ignored them completely. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and unhurried, "I am Ambassador Grace Holloway. I have been sent by United Earth Command to discuss the future relationship between our peoples." The Emperor's eyes opened. All 6 of them focused on this single human woman who dared to stand unbowed in his throne room. "You have no right to be here," he said. "Your species attacked our fleet. You killed our soldiers. You invaded our territory." "With respect, Your Majesty, that is not what happened." Holloway's voice remained calm. "Your forces attacked a peaceful scout ship conducting an exploration mission. Your forces invaded a civilian colony. Your forces attempted orbital bombardment of a farming community. We defended ourselves, nothing more." "You destroyed 200 of our ships." "Yes, we did." Holloway showed no emotion. "And we could have destroyed them all. We chose not to. We let your survivors go. Do you know why?" The Emperor said nothing. The throne room was absolutely silent. "Because we want peace," Holloway said. "Humanity has no interest in conquest. We do not want your territory or your resources or your slaves. We want to explore, to grow, to build. We want to meet new species and learn from them. We came to your borders hoping to find friends." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We still hope to find friends." The Emperor leaned forward. "And if we do not want to be your friends? If we want revenge for the ships you destroyed, the soldiers you killed? Then you will have war." Holloway's voice did not change. "And you will lose." Princess Mirath stepped forward before she could stop herself. The court gasped at the breach of protocol, but Mirath did not care. She had to know. "How can you be so certain?" she asked. "You defeated one fleet. You cannot know that you would defeat our entire empire." Holloway turned to face the princess. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. She activated it, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the throne room. "The force that defeated your invasion fleet," Holloway said, "consisted of 1 carrier, 4 destroyers, and 200 pilots. This represents approximately 0.003% of humanity's total military capacity." The display showed numbers, ship counts, personnel figures, industrial output. The Velanthari nobles stared at the data in growing horror. "The vessel your forces initially encountered," Holloway continued, "was a reconnaissance scout, the Stalwart, 12 crew members. Its mission was observation and mapping. It was not designed for combat. It had minimal weapons and light armor. It was crewed by explorers, not soldiers." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every noble, every advisor, every guard. "Your empire lost 40% of an attack fleet to a reconnaissance scout. You lost 12,000 ground troops to farmers with hunting rifles. You lost 207 warships to 5 vessels and 200 pilots." The display changed, showing the full strength of the United Earth military. The numbers were staggering. Millions of ships, billions of soldiers, industrial capacity that dwarfed the Velanthari Empire. Our intelligence estimates suggest your empire could field approximately 4 million warships if you mobilized completely, Holloway said. United Earth Command wants you to know that we would consider that a challenge, not a threat. A challenge, and we would meet it. Emperor Cassith's claws had dug so deep into his throne that the obsidian was cracking. "What do you want?" he asked. "I told you. We want peace." Holloway deactivated the display. "We want trade agreements and cultural exchange. We want to be allies instead of enemies. We want your people and our people to learn from each other, to grow together, to build something better than either of us could build alone." She smiled, and there was no threat in it, only sincerity. "We would very much prefer to be your friends, Your Majesty, because I promise you, with absolute honesty, that you do not want to see what happens when humanity considers someone an enemy." The throne room was silent. The Emperor sat frozen on his throne, his mind racing through options that all led to the same conclusion. War with humanity would be suicide. The Battle of New Haven had proven that. His finest fleet, his greatest general, his best soldiers, all destroyed by a tiny fraction of human strength. And still the humans offered peace. Princess Mirath looked at her father and saw something she had never seen before. She saw doubt. She saw fear. She saw an emperor who had finally met a force he could not conquer. She stepped forward again. "Father," she said softly, "I recommend we accept the ambassador's offer of friendship." The Emperor looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he looked at Holloway, at this human woman who stood alone in a room full of beings who could kill her with a word, and who showed no fear at all. He thought about his empire, built over 3,000 years of conquest. He thought about his ancestors, who had crushed every species they encountered. He thought about his legacy, his pride, his certainty that the Velanthari were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. And then he thought about 12 humans in a scout ship, dancing through weapons fire, tearing his fleet apart like it was made of paper. Slowly. Painfully, Emperor Cassith the Younger rose from his obsidian throne. "Ambassador Holloway," he said, and his voice was heavy with the weight of a humbled empire. "Let us discuss peace." Holloway bowed her head in respect. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I believe this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." Far away, on a small blue-green planet called New Haven, Lieutenant Commander Nate Calloway stood in a field of corn and watched the sunset. His ship was being repaired. His crew was resting. The farmers were replanting what the battle had destroyed. Sergeant Dawson walked up beside him. "They say the Emperor agreed to peace talks." "I heard." "We did it, sir. We actually did it." Calloway nodded slowly. He thought about the battle in the asteroid field, 12 people against 40 warships. He thought about the farmers with their hunting rifles, standing against an empire. He thought about Admiral Cole and her 5 ships, destroying a fleet that should have overwhelmed them. "We did," he said. "But let's hope we never have to do it again." Dawson smiled. "And if we do?" Calloway looked at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, an empire was learning that humanity was not to be underestimated. Somewhere out there, new species waited to be discovered, new worlds waited to be explored, new adventures waited to begin. "If we do," he said, "then we'll be ready." He turned away from the sunset and walked toward the lights of the colony, where 40,000 humans were rebuilding their lives. They had faced an empire and survived. They had been outnumbered and outgunned and given no chance of victory, and they had won anyway, because that was what humans did.